My name is Mason Drake, and what I'm about to tell you still doesn't feel real. One rainy night in Fairhaven, a frail old man climbed into my car, spoke words that hit deeper than anything I'd ever heard, and 12 hours later, he was gone. What he left behind didn't just change my life, it forced me to believe in second chances again. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive, real people, real mistakes, and the kind of turns that prove how fast everything can change. I still see it clearly. Harold Winslow, 82 years old, hands quivering as he pressed a $26,000 handwritten draft into mine. He sat in the back seat of my mid-size sedan, the same one that still smelled like burnt oil and regret from my collapsed business. November rain slammed against the glass, drowning out his voice until he leaned forward and said softly, "You carry the same look as someone I once loved." His eyes were wet, his ash-gray hair matted to his forehead, and for a heartbeat it felt like the universe had stitched two broken strangers together. The next morning, at 7:10 a.m., his lawyer Nathaniel Graves called. By noon, I was sitting in a marble office at Graves Holbrook LLP inside Ashworth Tower, staring at the man who told me I had inherited $93 million. My pulse stopped. I waited for someone to burst in and fix the mistake. Then Nathaniel read a letter Harold had written only hours before he died. Whatever it said dropped me to my knees. Security rushed in because they thought I was having a breakdown. That letter revealed a blood connection between our families, something neither of us had known until the end. From that day on, the world never looked the same. 8 months earlier, I'd stood in the rain watching excavators crush the garden workshop my father Walter Drake and I had built. That night, I was sleeping behind a supermart in the same car I used for Rideshare Go. The leather seat was my bed, my office, my cell. Every dawn started with the screech of delivery trucks. Every morning, I'd buy a $39 coffee at Corner Brew Cafe, wash up in their sink, and pretend I still had somewhere to be. My company, Drake Landscaping Design, had once had 12 employees, contracts with the City Arboretum and Maplewood Country Club, and enough prestige to make my younger brother Calvin proud. When it all fell apart, he stopped returning my calls. His last words were knives. "Mason, you didn't just lose a company. You lost my trust." Dad left voicemails disguised as favors. "Son, I've got extra savings lying idle. Help me put it to use." But pride kept me from answering. Nights I ate instant pasta cans cold, pretending hunger built character. Every ping on the app became hope, a chance to buy gas or pay another month on my rented depot locker, the only place still holding my life. Dad's tools, photo albums, the oak writing table where I once signed contracts worth more than I could now imagine. Tessa Rowe, my ex-wife, saw it coming before I did. In our spotless kitchen, she said, "You're the kind of man who waits to ask for help until everyone else is already drowning." Then she left for Milford, taking our daughter, Lila Drake, with her. Lila was 7, old enough to sense I was lying, young enough to believe me when I said I was between adventures. I didn't know it yet, but the next stranger who'd step into my car was about to prove that some endings are only waiting for braver hands to start again. That Friday morning in November, the rain didn't fall. It poured in sheets that made Fairhaven look like a sinking world. There's a kind of chill here that bites straight through your coat, like nature's way of reminding you that winter never asks permission. My mid-size sedan's wipers smeared more than they cleared, dragging the world across the glass like streaks of tears. I'd been awake since 5:15 a.m. and had already done 3 rides, earning $48 after gas. Enough for another night keeping my rented depot locker, but not enough for dinner. The numbers ran through my head like a cruel joke. When the next ride request flashed on my screen, airport pickup, Terminal B, drop-off downtown, I almost hit decline. It was 45 minutes each way if traffic behaved, which it never did when the skies opened up like this. My gaslight glowed orange, mocking me again. I'd been surviving on 3 gallons at a time for weeks, rationing like a soldier on a losing front. Just one more day, I muttered, tapping accept. That has become my daily prayer. Just survive one more day. Driving through Brighton Avenue, I passed the Maplewood Country Club, where I'd once installed a Japanese meditation garden for Drake Landscaping Design. The cherry trees I planted probably still bloomed under another company's logo now. Success fades fast in this city, but failure disappears faster. I didn't know it then, but in exactly 53 minutes, a dying stranger would climb into my car and change everything I believed about luck, family, and forgiveness. He was waiting under the awning at Terminal B, standing straight despite the wind tearing at his coat. Harold Winslow looked like old money made human, quiet, refined, and completely out of place in a storm. His ash-gray hair was still perfectly combed, his custom gold timepiece glinting faintly beneath his sleeve. But his eyes, they were hollow, lost, the kind I'd seen staring back at me in mirrors for months. When I opened the trunk, he handed me a single weathered trunk, edges polished from age. "Thank you for braving this weather," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know it can't have been easy." For the first 10 minutes, I thought it would be another silent trip, but then he surprised me. "What had brought you to driving?" he asked, his voice carrying that faint Midwest tone that even wealth couldn't erase. "Business went under," I admitted. "Family landscaping company. My dad started it back in the 90s. I tried to grow too fast and trusted the wrong people." He nodded slowly, his gaze lost in the storm. "My son did the same," he said at last. "We had a pharmaceutical distribution firm, Winslow Medical Holdings. I built it brick by brick, and he wanted to take it national. I told him the market wasn't ready. We fought." His voice wavered, and he pressed his fingers against his eyes as though holding back years instead of tears. "That was 35 years ago, November 10th, 1986, the day before his 22nd birthday. I'd given him a custom gold timepiece engraved 'Patience Grows Legacies.' He threw it across my office, said I was choking him, said I'd never see him as more than my shadow." The pain in his tone didn't sound historic. It sounded fresh, raw, and bleeding. At a red light on Brighton Avenue, Harold took out his phone with shaky hands and scrolled until he found a picture. "My son, Ryan Winslow," he murmured. "He'd be about your age now." I glanced at the screen, and my breath caught. The man in that faded photo could have been me. Same brown eyes flecked with gold, same jawline, same tired look of a man who'd worked hard and lost more than he'd planned. It felt impossible, like I was staring through time at a version of myself who'd taken a different road and never made it home. When I finally asked what happened to his son, Harold Winslow took a long breath before answering. "Ryan Timothy Winslow," he said quietly. "He died in a motorcycle crash 4 weeks earlier. Angry, reckless. He'd been drinking, trying to prove something to a father who never came to watch." Silence filled the car. I could feel his stare burning into the back of my head through the mirror. "You have his eyes," he said at last. "Brown, with those gold flecks that flare when you care about something." My grip tightened on the wheel. Something between us shifted. An invisible bridge made of loss. He asked about my father, my brother, the business. Things strangers never ask. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. How I'd failed the Drake Landscaping Design legacy, how Calvin Drake blamed me for wrecking his job and his savings, how Dad, Walter Drake, still defended me at the hardware store like faith alone could rebuild a company. "He sounds like a good man," Harold murmured. "The best," I said, "which makes disappointing him the hardest part." "Pull over," he said suddenly as we neared downtown. His tone wasn't commanding, just urgent. I turned into a dim corner of a general pharmacy lot, rain drumming above us like restless fingers. "I came here to visit my son's grave," Harold confessed, voice trembling. "First time since the funeral. I've carried a letter to him for 30 years, rewriting it every birthday, every death anniversary. But I never read it at Meadowlawn Cemetery. 35 years of airports and boardrooms, and I couldn't drive 20 minutes to meet him." "Why now?" I asked. The storm outside roared louder, wrapping the car in isolation. He exhaled slowly. "The doctor gave me 3 weeks. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Apparently it's been eating me alive while I've been approving expansion budgets. He said it was like a quarterly report, not a death sentence. The matter-of-fact tone hurt worse than any emotion could. "I've got no one left, Mason," he continued, and hearing him use my name like that nearly stopped my heart. "My wife, Beatrice, died 9 years ago. Heart attack in her sleep. No other children. Just attorneys, employees, and an empire that feels like a mausoleum with my initials carved on it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folio, the surface worn smooth by time. A gold pen clicked open in his shaking hand. "Let me pay you for your time," he said. "The app already covers the fare, Mr. Winslow." "This is different." He wrote with careful strokes, tore the page free, folded it twice, and handed it over. "Promise me you won't open it until you're home, or wherever you call home tonight. And before you sleep, call your father. Tell him you love him. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him something, anything, but don't let silence be your answer." His eyes burned with a kind of desperation I'll never forget. I'd give every dollar, every property, every investment I've ever made for one more argument with my son. One more chance to tell him, "You were right, Ryan. I should have trusted you." He pressed an ivory contact card into my palm. "If you ever need someone who understands failure, the kind that doesn't show on spreadsheets, call me." The drive to the Monarch Inn downtown passed in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. At the grand entrance beneath its old Art Deco awning, Harold turned to me. "You know the cruelest irony?" he asked, rain glistening on his lashes. "I spent 35 years building an empire worth $93 million, and I'd trade it all for one more slam door, one more storming exit from my son. At least then I'd know he was still alive to come back." He gripped my hand. "Your father's breathing, Mason. Don't make him wait decades for a ghost to visit." Then he vanished through the revolving doors. I sat there 20 minutes with the engine off, holding the folded paper and his card. Back behind the supermart, when the lot finally went quiet, I unfolded the paper. A handwritten draft. $26,000. The handwritten draft was shaky, but Harold Winslow's signature slashed across the bottom like a declaration. $26,000. From a dying man who saw his lost son when he looked at me. That night, close to 11 p.m., I called Walter Drake. I knew he'd still be awake, probably in his garden workshop, pretending to fix something so he wouldn't think about his broken son. When he answered, his voice was warm but uneasy. "Mason? Son, what's wrong?" It took me 10 seconds to find words. Then everything spilled out. Harold, the story of his son Ryan, the check, and how that conversation had cracked something open inside me. I broke down right there in my mid-sized sedan, parked behind the supermart, rain pounding the roof like a confession booth. "I'm coming," my father said simply. "Where are you?" He drove 3 hours through the storm from Milford, headlights cutting through the dark like determination itself. When he arrived, he didn't lecture me or ask for explanations. He just wrapped his arms around me while I wept for everything I'd lost. Our business, our name, my pride, and a stranger who'd given me a reason to try again. By the next morning, I was asleep in my childhood room, surrounded by youth medals and sun-bleached posters. I hadn't slept that peacefully in months. Then just after 7:10 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Mr. Drake, this is Nathaniel Graves from Graves Holbrook, LLP. I represent Mr. Harold Winslow. I'm afraid I have difficult news. Mr. Winslow passed away last night." I froze. That can't be right. I dropped him off at the Monarch Inn yesterday afternoon. "He went peacefully in his sleep," Nathaniel said softly. "The staff found him this morning when he didn't respond to his wake-up call. He updated his will only hours before he passed, and you're directly involved. I need you in my office today." The drive to Fairhaven didn't feel real. My father rode beside me, in silence, his hand occasionally tightening on my shoulder like an anchor. The $26,000 draft sat heavy in my wallet, untouched. Graves Holbrook, LLP occupied the top floor of Ashworth Tower, all glass and oak paneling. The air smelled of polish and quiet power. When Nathaniel Graves greeted us, his usually composed face looked drained. "Mr. Winslow called me at 8 p.m., he said. He insisted on immediate changes to his will. When I advised waiting, he told me, "I've waited 35 years, too long already." He opened a tan legal folder, the pages dense with legalese, and Harold's final signature stamped in blue ink. "Mr. Drake," Nathaniel said carefully, "Harold Winslow left you his entire estate, $93 million in assets, multiple properties, and full controlling interest in Winslow Medical Holdings." The room swayed. My father steadied me. "That's impossible," I said. "We met once. He didn't even know me." Nathaniel adjusted his glasses, then unfolded a letter. He anticipated that reaction. He asked me to read this to you. Harold's letter read, "Mason, I know you'll want to refuse this, but there's something you must hear. After my son died, Beatrice and I hired investigators to learn about his final weeks. We found out he'd been seeing a young woman, Evelyn Drake, who worked at a flower shop near Briarwood College. She was 19 and pregnant. We didn't know her last name at the time. She vanished after his death, changed addresses, changed phones. We searched for years. Beatrice never forgave herself for stopping too soon. Yesterday, I had my team run a new trace using modern records. They found her history. She died in 2006, but not before giving birth on July 4th, 1987. She named her son Daniel Harper. Daniel is 38 now, married, 3 kids, my grandson. I stared at the floor, my chest tightening. Evelyn Drake, my father's younger sister. She died when I was 10. No one ever said who the baby's father was, just whispered that she'd made mistakes. My father stood up, staring out the window. "She never told us," he muttered. "She carried that secret her whole life." Nathaniel continued reading. "Mason, that boy, Daniel Harper, was my blood. But you were my reminder. You could have taken advantage of a dying man yesterday. You didn't. You listened. You cared. You are family, Mason, not by birth, but by heart. You're the man my son might have become, someone who falls hard, but still has the strength to help a stranger stand." 3 weeks later, I met Daniel Harper at a small cafe in Riverton. He had Harold's calm eyes and Evelyn's quiet smile. When he showed me photos of his kids, I saw the same stubborn jawline passed down through generations, proof that even when family disappears, blood still finds its way home. "I always wondered why my birth mother gave me up," Daniel Harper said, slowly stirring his coffee. "My adoptive parents were kind, gave me everything, but there was always this hole. Now I think she was protecting me from a grief that wasn't mine to carry." We stood side by side a week later at Harold Winslow's funeral inside Stonebridge Chapel. The pews were filled with executives, politicians, and employees, yet somehow Daniel and I were the only true family there, 2 strangers connected by DNA, and one old man's redemption. During the eulogy, I spoke about that 40-minute ride-share go drive that changed both our lives. Harold had given me far more than money. He'd given me permission to fall without calling myself a failure. When the inheritance came, I didn't rebuild Drake Landscaping Design. That would have been too small for what Harold's gift meant. Instead, I started the Winslow Second Chance Trust, a foundation that helps failed small business owners get back on their feet, not charity, but dignity. We offer bridge funding, mentorship, and a reminder that losing a business isn't losing your worth. It's just life demanding a new plan. My brother Calvin now runs the operations. When I first told him, he stood in the doorway of his apartment, speechless. Then he asked, "You're really using $93 million to help people who messed up like we did?" I nodded, and he hugged me for the first time in years. Since Harold's passing 3 years ago, we've helped over 400 families keep their dreams alive, a bakery in East Fairhaven, a roofing company in Crestmont, and even a flower shop in Elmstead, run by a single mother, who reminded me of what Evelyn Drake might have been if she'd been offered understanding instead of shame. Every Friday evening, my father Walter and I share dinner. Behind his house grows the Winslow Memorial Grove, a garden he planted himself. Wild roses climb over the fences, untamed and stubborn, just like the people who inspired them. Sometimes Daniel brings his kids. They run through the paths laughing, plucking flowers without permission. They don't know they're playing in a monument built from forgiveness that took 35 years to bloom. A month after the funeral, Nathaniel Graves delivered one last envelope. Inside was a letter Harold had written the morning he met me. If you're reading this, Mason, it means I finally found the courage to let go. Don't let money be your monument. Let it be the tool that builds bridges back to the people you love. Every failed business is just a successful family waiting to remember what matters. I keep Harold's ivory contact card in my wallet beside a photo of my father and me in front of our first garden workshop, before the excavators tore it down. On the back of that card, in the steadier handwriting of a man still full of life, he'd written, "Every ending waits for a braver hand to start again." Last week, a woman stepped into my rideshare go-car. Yes, I still drive once a week, early Friday mornings, mostly airport runs. It keeps me grounded. She was weeping over a failed restaurant, convinced she'd let her immigrant parents down. I listened, just like Harold once listened to me. When we reached the terminal, I handed her a card for the Winslow Second Chance Trust. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. I thought of Harold, the November rain, the trembling hands, the impossible generosity that changed everything. "Because some forgiveness shouldn't wait a lifetime," I said. "And sometimes, strangers are just family we haven't met yet." Now, on the same patch of land where our first business once stood, my father, Calvin, Daniel, and I rebuilt a new greenhouse together, funded by Harold's fortune, raised by our own hands. In its center stands a young oak tree with a bronze plaque that reads, "For Harold and Ryan Winslow, who proved that some roots run deeper than blood, and some families are grown from forgiveness." If this story reminded you of someone you need to forgive, or call, share it. Leave a comment about your second chances, because sometimes one unexpected conversation in the back seat of a mid-sized sedan can change everything.